And Gary is with me in the studio now. Welcome, Gary. Can you start by taking us right back to when you were, 8 or 9 years old, and you're in the East End looking out over the terraced house windows to the Canary Wharf, blinking in the distance?
Yeah, of course. I grew up in Ilford, East London, a little terraced house with my family, crowded little house, playing football on the streets, guy in the street. And when I was a kid, that's when the Canary Wharf skyscrapers first went up. So we were very poor growing up, but I was always very good at maths. So I think you just kind of assume if you're good at maths, you're going to go work in those skyscrapers one day. So I worked pretty hard. I had a few ups and downs, got very good grades at maths, managed to go to the London School of Economics, a very fancy economics uni in London. I entered a card game. I won a card game, which is where the title of the book, The Trading Game, comes from. So in 2005, I won this card game competition for Citibank called The Trading Game. And that's how I got my job as the youngest trader in the city, starting in the beginning of 2008.
And it was a really, really strange and alien world when you walked into it. Quite scary. Some fairly scary people all around you.
Yeah, a lot of big people for some reason. I'm not the biggest guy. A lot of big guys. There's this kind of myth of the sort of Cockney wide boy trader, which some people might think I fit. But in reality, nowadays, and even back then in the 2000s, it was a lot of rich guys from rich families, basically. A lot of people sort of boarding school, private school. And it wasn't the most polite place to work. At one point, a guy barked at me like a dog and growled at me like a wolf because he thought I'd got him in trouble for drinking too much. Let's say it was a very testosterone-filled environment.
And in this testosterone-fueled environment, you do very, very well. You make a lot of money for the bank and for yourself. And it goes on and on and on. And it's a time when the British economy, like many economies around the world, pretty much flat on its back. Yeah. People really, really scared. Homelessness beginning to spread again. A real sense that the world financial system isn't working. And the real reason you're here is for me to ask you how different things are today.
Well, I think it's amazing. So I worked in the aftermath of the 2008 crisis. I started working just before the 2008 crisis started. And I was super young. I was 21. And it was crazy because the specific desk that I worked on in Citibank in Canary Wharf started to make a ton of money during 2008. And obviously, this is when the global economy is collapsing. A lot of my friends from university were losing their jobs. But the guys I was working with were making tons and tons of money. And I was 21 and I was kind of desperately trying to figure out what was happening. But I think what is more interesting than the crash itself is how weak the recovery was afterwards. And everybody thought after 2008 that we were going to have this massive economic recovery.
Yeah.
And when COVID was happening, I don't know, it's easy to forget this now, but when COVID was happening, do you remember the roaring 20s?
I do.
Do you remember the media saying we're going to have a roaring 20s because of pent-up demand? You remember pent-up demand?
It's going to be fantastic.
So for me, sitting and watching COVID, I actually stopped trading for a long time. But when COVID happened, and I heard the economists and people on the news saying there's going to be a roaring 20s, all this pent-up demand, I got my laptop out and I started trading again because what I saw was basically exactly the same thing happening again, which was economic crisis being dealt with in such a way that the government pumps a ton of money in, nearly bankrupts itself. None of that money stays with ordinary people. It ends up getting accumulated by the rich. The rich get richer and richer and richer, and so ordinary people suffer.
We come back to the quote I started with. Why does that happen? Try to explain to people why the money always ends up with the rich.
The best example is COVID. All right? So do you know what the total government deficit is since the beginning of COVID?
About 100 billion or something?
$1 trillion. It's £1 trillion, which is £20,000 for every adult in the country. It's an unbelievably enormous number. Really, nothing economically matters except for that number because of the enormous scale of that number. We knew at the beginning of COVID, the government was going to pump maybe not £1 trillion, maybe £500 billion into the economy. If you are going to pump £500 billion from the government debt into the economy, you have to ask, who is going to end up with that money? Who is going to accumulate that money? And the most amazing thing happened during COVID, which was that nobody asked. So I did the analysis, right? Government pumps this money in. Where does it go? Furloughed workers. Do furloughed workers get richer? No. Because they just have to pay, they're not getting their wages anymore, right? They pay their bills, they pay their mortgage, it goes to the owners of the houses, the owners of the companies, rich people.
Which are the banks, ultimately.
Well, ultimately, it's rich people. And what do rich people do with the money during COVID? Nothing, because they can't spend it. What you saw during COVID was basically the greatest money laundering trick of all time. £1 trillion was pumped from the government through the poor to the rich.
So sort of liquid money, hot money becomes a solid asset.
Yeah, well, rich people, if you give an ordinary person 10, 20 grand, they're going to spend it. If you give a rich person 20 grand, they're going to buy 20 grand worth of assets. And when I talk about I started trading again during COVID, the first thing I did was I opened my laptop and I bought £1 million worth of gold. And gold was collapsing. because I knew, this enormous amount of money, £1 trillion, and the US number is, I think, $13 trillion. Once you ask and answer that question, where will the money end up? And you know it's going to be accumulated by the richest people in society. You know straight away, gold price will go up, house prices will go up, stock prices will go up, inflation will go up, because that's what these people do. They don't just sit on the money. This is a broken system for ordinary people. This is a broken system. You're going home to Ilford while this is happening. You're seeing people sleeping out in the streets. You're seeing boarded up houses and so forth. And there comes a point when there's a kind of disgust grows inside you about the system, and you leave and you say, "I'm going to start to campaign for a different kind of economy." So, what is the essence of the better economy that you have as a vision? I think we cannot accept an economy where wealth inequality grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. I want people to understand that when the rich get richer and richer and richer and richer, and in the last 5 years, that's happened at unbelievable speed, that wealth is not coming out of nowhere. So what we've seen in the last 5 years is this unbelievable increase in billionaire wealth, at the same time as collapsing government wealth, which is why we're having austerity now, collapsing middle class wealth, which is why people can't afford homes. Those two things are connected. We need to fix this tax system, which at the moment taxes ordinary people 30, 40, 50%, and sees billionaires inheriting tens of billions and paying nothing.
And yet we're just hearing this weekend from the government that they can't go for a wealth tax, as Neil Kinnock, for instance, has suggested, because it hasn't worked anywhere. It's been tried in lots of countries. It's never really worked. Therefore, guys, it's off the table. What do you say?
If you don't do something about this massive increase in billionaire wealth, which is squeezing wealth out of the rest of society, you have to accept that the middle class will disappear. You have to accept enormous increases in poverty. You have to accept the end of the welfare state. I don't want to accept those things. And I would speak to the government and I would say, listen, you have to be bigger in your ambitions.
So how do you get that money back? In practical terms, what would you do if you were Rachel Reeves?
Well, look, if we look at history, there's only really one case we have where wealth inequality significantly decreased, where wealth was transferred from the elites back to ordinary people. That was the 20th century. That was the aftermath of World War II. What we saw then was a massive transfer of wealth away from the elites towards the government, towards the middle class.
That was high levels of income tax.
Well, really, what it was the war. To be honest, it was the war. It was the war led to.
We don't want that.
Exactly, and that is. I'm not calling for a war because I don't want there to be a war. What I want is a fairer taxation system. I want to reduce tax on working people and I want to increase tax on billionaires.
And do you think it is possible, without sort of the flight of the rich and all the things that we're told about, to actually, as it were, take asset value, asset wealth back from the super rich back to the rest of us?
I think it is possible, I want to be really clear, right? When I say this, tax the rich, tax the super rich, people often think I'm talking about lawyers, bankers, heaven forbid, even YouTubers and radio presenters. I'm talking about millionaires and billionaires here. I'm talking about individuals and families hoarding enormous amounts of wealth. The thing is, if we were to tax radio presenters, you could go and do this show from Dubai. But if I'm going to tax a billionaire, billionaires don't get their money from their work. They get their money from their assets, and their assets are here. Look what happened when the government suddenly decided it wanted to tax Roman Abramovich's assets. Roman Abramovich is on the first plane to Moscow. What does he own? Chelsea Football Club. These people are taxable because their assets are here. And I never said it will be easy. It won't be easy. If you do not tax them, I guarantee you poverty will continue to explode in this country. And I'm not just saying that, I'm betting on it. And I bet on it year after year, and I've made millions of pounds betting on it. And I don't want to be right this time.
Absolutely. Let's just think a little bit about the plight of this government right now, because, they're looking at the need for more cuts in welfare, squeezing the welfare budget, because the bond markets are looking at them and saying, you've lost control of the fiscal situation, therefore we're going to punish you, we're going to push interest rates up, and then you're scuppered.
Yeah. I think this is what happens when you have a naivety towards wealth. I talk about this £1 trillion. This £1 trillion didn't come from nowhere. That £1 trillion is on the government debt now. There's a really interesting graph. The French economist Thomas Piketty. So for those who don't know, this is a French economist, does a lot of work on wealth inequality. He made these graphs looking at how much wealth the government owns. And back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the government of this country had a lot of wealth. It owned schools, it owned hospitals, and that meant it could provide public services. That collapsed during the 90s and 2000s. And then during COVID, massively collapsed negative. Where has that wealth gone now? There is a phenomenal naivety about wealth in the economic conversation now. If you do not get that wealth back, you have no choice but to shut the welfare state down, which is why I was screaming at government before the election. I was screaming at the Labour Party, because we knew they were coming in. Listen, you need to do something about taxation. You need to do something about wealth. They were naive to that. They've walked into the situation, they've got no wealth, they're bankrupt, the rich are super rich, they are unwilling to tax them, and now they're left with basically no choice but to shut the welfare state down. Listen, this is what happens if you are naive about wealth. Wealth is hemorrhaging from government, from the middle class to the rich. If you do not stop that flow of wealth, you have no choice but to shut down the welfare state that our grandparents and great-grandparents fought and died for.
So what you want in the end is a political class with a bit of the testosterone, a bit of the cojones, a bit of the aggression that you saw on the trading floor.
A bit of ambition. Yeah. I want to see, when I was working as a trader in Japan, I was complaining about the traders around me, and my junior said, the problem with these traders is they are men with small hearts. And I think that was translated directly from Japanese. But I see too much of that in politics. I want to see ambition. Listen, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they were born in poverty. 3 of my grandma's siblings died of tuberculosis, a disease of poverty. And they fought for a fairer system, for a better distribution. And that is why me and my parents grew up with a welfare state, housing, education, healthcare, food. They fought for it, and they came from a worse position than us. They knew the importance of distribution and a fair share of the pie. We need to change the tax system, tax working people less, tax the super rich more, tax wealth not work.
Gary, what a thought-provoking, really, really interesting conversation. Thanks very, very much for coming into LBC, and congratulations on the trading game. Great book. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.